to the First Do Table Talk podcast. I'm your host, Eddie Buchanan. We're launching this podcast as a platform for real-world discussions about challenges that public safety leaders face in an ever-changing and evolving environment. We'll be engaging with leaders and innovators who are on the front lines of emergency operations, technology, data, and culture. Many of the world's challenges could be solved at the firehouse kitchen table with a good old cup of coffee and some firehouse wisdom. So we thought, let's bring some of that wisdom into the spotlight. To kick off our first show, we have a very special guest, Craig Weinschenk from the Fire Safety Research Institute at UL. He's the Director of Research assigned to the NERIS project, which is the National Emergency Response Information System. We've migrated clients, thousands of clients over to the NERIS platform with a large majority of our folks already up and running, and just a few more to transition once they get ready. So we're excited to have Craig on the show to see where the fire service is headed with NERIS today. So pull up a chair at the table. Let's go. Craig Weinschenk, man, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate you. You've got to have an insanely busy schedule, so I appreciate you taking a minute to hop on the show with us.
Absolutely, Eddie. I mean, anything for you, my friend. And happy to be here. Happy to talk data with you.
Yeah, I always feel like, I've known you for a while in different capacities, so now I owe you another one. That's a little code between you and I. But no, I appreciate you taking the time and all that. And we're recording this in mid-January, right? So we're knee deep into the transition to NERIS. And what kind of tell us what benchmarks still remain on the calendar? Where are we at in the process? What's coming next? How's that going?
It's going well. As far as benchmarks, it's tricky because I don't think we're ever done. This is not well, we're live now, so we can rest. Our goal is to have every department in the country reporting. That's the task at hand, right? So we've got a lot more folks that we need to start seeing records from. And we've got some additional schemas to release, the incident analysis, so kind of the more in-depth piece on your typical incident. Community risk reduction, health and safety or health and wellness. And then, in parallel to all of that, it's taking all the feedback we've gotten from folks who have been reporting. We have over 2.1 million records in, so there's been a lot of feedback. And now it's time to improve. We set out when we designed this system was that we weren't going to go 15 years between updates. So we're working to get the infrastructure in place to open the schemas back up for national engagement, so that folks who are unhappy or feel that parts are incomplete have a venue to provide feedback and structured feedback so that we can act on it. That's the biggest piece. Is we want to improve. You won't see anybody from the NERIS team say that we're perfect. We're far from it, but we want to work towards perfect. And that comes with engagement, comes with feedback, and comes with folks participating. So if folks are upset and say, oh, hey, why aren't we doing anything? Well, there's going to be avenues for all of that so that we can corral it and act on it and improve.
Well, that's new, right? For any of us that came up in the era of the old system, there was no feedback. It wasn't anything you ever expected. So that's a whole new universe to think about, that we actually can contribute back to the data set, and to the schema and inform it as we go. That was never a thing. So.
Yeah, and part of it is with a modern architecture, we're afforded abilities to update and adapt faster. There's easier things to do with a modern technology stack that NFIRS was kind of handcuffed based on the architecture that was designed 20, 30 years ago. So with that regard, we do have some things in our favor. But it's just it is our mindset, right? It's how USFA has directed us. It's how FSRI operates, right? Is we want to do what's right for the fire service. And the more we can get your feedback, the more we can corral kind of the fire service to tell us where we have gaps. That means we can minimize the custom, minimize the plus ones, right? We don't want to stop custom from a software vendor perspective, but from a data schema perspective, if it's important to a department, it's probably important to multiple departments. And if that number continues to swell, then it's probably important for the national schema. And the only way we know is when people tell us. And so that's what we're really working towards is trying to avoid the custom in the data schema sense, so that we can tell the aggregate story, that we can provide feedback back to the locals, to counties, to states, to the federal government, to the fire service at large, right? How do we quantify what's happening so that we can improve our fire ground operations?
And I guess folks have, what is it, the end of the month to archive any of the old stuff, the old data that you might want?
Yes, yes, sir. NFIRS, as far as the public facing side and the database, ends in January 31st. So if you're looking to export data, please do so before the end of the calendar month. All the archived data, though, will still exist. It's going to be, still publicly available through FEMA's infrastructure and as publicly hosted feature services. So that the historical data isn't going away. But if you want the raw data that you submitted out of that system, you'll need to extract it before the end of this calendar month.
And that was when I first heard of NERIS, when it was first presented, it was actually like a kind of almost a private meeting with Dr. Lorimer Merrill. She, when she was first launching this initiative, the first thing that I was kind of concerned me was how those data sets meet. That like if you're in the world of predictive analytics, you're looking multiple years back. So we were concerned there would be like a gap, like there'd be this little period of time where we wouldn't be able to necessarily use the predictive capabilities. But I just learned the other day that the first two team figured that out, that we have the ability the way they designed the system, they can reach back and reach forward and have some ability to marry those data sets. So that made me feel so much better being a data nerd.
Yeah.
I was like,
And we get that question a lot too, is what do we do with our historical data? How do we query these things? And I think the first question is, what is the intent of your query? If we're trying to understand counts of fires, that's a pretty straightforward set of analytics or algorithms to create.
mhm.
We know these codes in NFIRS and this plain text are after the same thing. When we start to look at total call volume, okay, we can do that. The number of incidents run, right? And so I think the piece is when we think about what we want to forecast or even look back to, it's just be deliberate with our query. And there isn't a one-to-one, but there's an idea to idea, right? We are still trying to capture what happened on the fire ground. What did we respond to? Where did we go? What happened when we went there? Right. And so when we think about it in that way, I think there are a lot of parallels. But it is going to require a little bit of thought and care when you do look backwards, right? It's not just like, oh, just plug and play, right? I mean, smart folks are going to have to put in a few hours to build some of those tools. But we have seen, kind of across the industry, some folks really kind of building some of that infrastructure, right? Outside of the NERIS platform, right? As we have the NERIS data, but our goal is also to provide some high level thought, right, on how to look backwards. And so we're working on some of that document as well.
Yeah, I was thrilled that made the data nerd in me very happy that we had that capability still. Hey,
Excellent.
so I'm curious. I know Tom Jenkins, man. I think I saw him at everything I went to last year. I know you guys have done just a tremendous level of preparation, trying to get the word out. Just being everywhere you possibly could be with the message. How did it go? So when you look back at looking at all the planning and all that preparation to do that, such a historic transition, right? Hadn't seen it happen since I've been around, and then you look at it now. How do you feel about it? How did it go? Like, did you do as well as you thought you did? You did better? What's the word?
I'll start with, I'm a little biased. I think it went well. We were able to get invites to, around 27,000 of the 30,000 fire departments that we're aware of in the United States, which I think is a tremendous achievement. Now that happens because coordination with state fire marshals and state data leads, with fire chiefs associations, with every other fire organization you can imagine. If the entire fire service doesn't come together, this I don't think we get to where we are. So it's one, I want to a big thank you to everyone across this ecosystem, from the vendors to the locals to the union to the chiefs associations to the state organizations and USFA. I mean, it's kind of wild. Now, if you're listening and you didn't have an invite, you probably think, "Man, this did not go well because I don't have any credentials." So, we're far from perfect, as I always say. But, we the really cool part is, January 1st happened, right? We get an uptick in call volume, and we had been strategic around, working to get folks to transition kind of throughout calendar year 25 into 26. Because that deadline was not ours to choose. We were not like, oh, we're arbitrarily going to choose January 1 to be this date. I wish I had more time. It was, say, FEMA says we're decommissioning NFIRS because the architecture and the security posturing and all these other pieces of the puzzle that were well out of our hands. So we said, well, if we know this date, we have to work backwards. And so we worked backwards from a fixed date that we couldn't choose. Ask anyone on my team. We would love another year, but we were dealt this timeline, so we adapted, and that's reflected in a lot of choices we had to make over the last 2 years. But when call volume started to increase, the system scaled appropriately. We're processing somewhere around 60 to 70,000 calls a day, which is about 50 calls per minute. The metrics are there that the system is doing what it said it was supposed to do, right? We claimed it was going to do. Now, there's nuances all across the payloads and things that people probably wish we had done differently. But we saw the increased load and the system didn't blink, right? We didn't crash. We didn't have this, like, from that regard, I'm very pleased. I can't thank my team enough for all of that, right? I mean, we all basically gave up from Christmas to New Year's, to monitor, to support, to keep our eye on every piece of information that we collect behind the scenes to make sure the system was doing what it's supposed to. So in that regard, I couldn't be happier. But the job's not finished.
Sure.
We're not dropping any banners anytime soon. There's still a lot of folks that need assistance. There's we're still going to be there supporting them in the transition and post transition and listening to feedback. But I can't thank the industry enough for jumping in and saying, okay, let's do this. And now that we've kind of had that moment happen, now it's okay, how do we make it better? And that's still what motivates us all, right? Is how do we improve all of these pieces?
It was cool to watch, just from a kind of layperson's perspective. I'm just watching like the first two users transition, and there's this swell, of call volume starting to go that way, and to see it work so smoothly, I was just like, man, this is, it's cool to be here and to have that, to be able to see that those kind of gauges go up when the pressure increases. It's like what like somebody turning the throttle up on a pump and watching it run. It was pretty darn cool. So hats off to the team over there.
I mean, I think that's a great analogy, right? Is when you think about a large pumping network, right? Is that we've got 30,000 engines operating, right? Basically, sending us water. And so it is cool. And there's, you look back at the last several years, and there was a lot of folks, and rightfully so, right? Anyone who said we didn't think this could happen, I was probably in that camp to a degree, right? Like, you realize what the task at hand was, and it's exciting that we're here. And so there, for those folks, right? Like, cool, but and I'm sure there's still critics. I see them in our comms regularly, right? And so our job is to continue to work to improve. But it is cool, right? Like we modernized the system, right? I think in our first million records that have been submitted, the median time from call create, so when someone's picking up the phone to start the call to arrival in the NERIS database was 13 hours. That's an incredible compression of availability of data that we have never seen before, right? I mean, when you think about, and then when that data arrives, it's immediately available to the state and federal government through our API. So what was 12, 16, 18, 24 months sometimes to start to put all the pieces together because of just the manual processes that existed in the legacy system, right? We have now changed that. The fun side effect is now, because of the real timeness, right? If something's out of line, we get notified right away. It's a blessing and a curse,
Yeah.
but that's cool, right? That's a good problem to have. But it is remarkable to see that shift. And so it's okay, maybe we need to tighten some validation rules as we move forward. Absolutely. I'll be the first one to say we need to do that. And part of it was, when you think about building a system like this, when we set out and launched version 1 and put out that API publicly November 4th of 2024, it was to get to January 1 of 2026. If we make changes to that API that are breaking, and the entire community is moving, and now there's a breaking change, that stops development, that stops data flows, that stops everything. So we had to give more flexibility than I think we probably would have if this was a version 2, because there is no alternate then, right? And so as we move forward down the line and we support parallel versions, and we can start to be more restrictive and tighter with our requirements, right? And really listening to the community saying, look, if you don't require this, we're just not going to do it. Okay, then we're going to require it. But if we required it in November and had to make that change, and we break everyone's systems, right? The cascading impact is significant. And so we chose to be a little more flexible on day one, knowing that the mission right at hand is transition. And then now we can start to support, and maybe it's tiered levels of validation for departments that want to go above and beyond, right? There's a number of ways we can explore this, but it's working and listening to the community to drive it. But that's the really cool part is, the time has shrunk. So now we're getting the data. Now let's explore it and use the data to drive our validation rules, right? Where are the gaps? What are people doing wrong, or not necessarily wrong? I mean, or incomplete, right? Or not going that next level. Okay, well now let's put some more rules to guide them there, because that information is critical, right? When we design the schema, and when we open it up again, it's, if we're not going to use that question or that answer, why ask, right? Every question we ask is your time, right? That's a firefighter having to spend time answering a question that they did not sign up to be a firefighter to answer. So if we can minimize those times, right, and say, okay, we really care about this as a community, let's focus their efforts there and say, hey, maybe these aren't as necessary. Or if they are, let's make sure we use them, right? So if we're going to ask a question, we better use it in analytics. We better use it for something to improve the fire service.
And it's probably an important point to make to the firefighter perspective. When you're filling out a report and you're tapping dots, on a screen or however you're doing it, I wouldn't expect you shouldn't expect it to be the old report, right? Like, it's not the same thing. So it's not really that, this is different, I'm going to blame it on the technology. You're asking different questions for a purpose, man. That's what that's about. It's not just we change something for the sake of changing it. It's
Yeah. I
it
mean,
has purpose.
yeah, we get that a lot, asked all the time on, why'd you go with multiple incident types? That's so confusing, right? And in the data, we still see primarily single incident type submissions. Now, the reason we did it is that emergency response is complex, right? The fire service as an industry, right, is kind of one of the last industries to still think is a single value problem. But when you respond to a complex incident, you're sending trucks, you're sending rescue squads, you're sending ambulances, you're sending engines, right? Those are 4 different specialty pieces of apparatus that we all know are not inexpensive in modern times, with specialty trained crews, with specialty equipment. To then say, well, this is going to be smushed down into one single phrase to describe the incident, right? From a quantitative perspective, is doing ourselves a disservice, right? So if we think about, you know, a motor vehicle collision, right? Even we'll just say a motor vehicle collision with entrapment, you're sending a rescue squad and an ambulance at bare minimum, right? Or a truck, depending upon your response. Right. You've got to manage traffic. You've got to manage the scene, right? We call it a hazardous situation in NERIS because it is hazardous to the firefighters. Right. We see far too many firefighter injuries and fatalities on roadways. So classifying it that is intentional. And then when you look at like, okay, we've got now entrapment. Well, that's you train for that. People train their entire careers to be proficient at cutting vehicles. Right now, as we move to an electrified world, right, cutting vehicles is a different. It's retraining. It's justifying all of those needs. Right. And that's where our emerging hazards module comes into place. Even if there's not a fire, recognizing that there's an EV, right, is important because it tells us that these vehicles are there and the crashes are happening, and whether there's fire or not, we need to be prepared as a response community for these hazards. And so all of this is intentional, and one of our limitations, and I'll take a lot of blame for this, is, you know, trying to communicate all of this while building this, while flying, right? The building the plane, flying the plane, boarding the plane, right? Redesigning the plane simultaneously. There's only so many hours in the day, right? The team's
Yeah.
only so big. The community is so large, right? And so that's you know, a hit to us, and I'll absolutely own it. But that's a big focus of ours moving forward, is the motivation and the why behind all these asks. But when we think about, you know, hey, that was a complex incident, right? That's the ones we talk about at the kitchen table. Those are the ones that probably should warrant the additional incident types where relevant, right? So that when you go to your community and your citizens and ask for that new fire station or that new apparatus or the budget to increase training, right? What's the first 2 things that get cut when budgets go? It's community risk reduction and training, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what are we adding? Well, let's add ability to tell the story of how complex incidents are, and let's add a community risk reduction module so that we can quantify that impact. All of this is intentional, but the message is hard sometimes to communicate at scale. And that's where, you know, we are really going to focus over 26, 27 beyond, is showing the impact of data, whether that's, you know, it's success stories at the local level, success stories in kind of with our third party integration partners like yourselves, right? Of like, here's how you know, the industry benefits when people collaborate, right? And we have relationships with all the vendor community that we work hard to maintain. And I think, you know, more collaboration is going to be good for the fire service, right? And I'm excited about that. We had a kickoff meeting where we brought, you know, the vendors into California in the summer of 24, that I thought was
Yeah, I
incredible,
was there.
because oftentimes the folks aren't in the room together, right? And so we sat down, we talked about what do we need from NERIS and vice versa, and how do we put this plan in motion, and those are things we want to continue to do moving forward, is to bring the community together, right? Versus maybe a little, I think we at times we've been a little more siloed than we probably recognize. Um, it's just human nature, right? And so how do we break down some of those barriers? Well, I think data is a big piece of how we do that.
So you probably saw, I know you saw some cases go very well. I know you saw some cases struggle. What lessons, if I was a fire department back at the starting line, like I'm getting ready to do this because now we're out of time. It's time to do it. Any advice that you would share, knowing what we know now, that you would share with those fire departments?
Yeah, one, keep an open mind. Uh, there is change. It is a little different, and I think that is the biggest piece. The next one is knowing more about your demographics. We ask questions around your dispatch, right? Are you a single jurisdiction, multi-jurisdiction, single discipline, multi-discipline dispatch? those are things as chief officer, you probably want to know. And folks, that those are pieces of like know your community. We ask some demographic information for a reason. It's so that we can then layer that in your analytics. So knowing that information is critical. It's not required, right? Well, we have time to put all that information in. You can start reporting without that information in, don't worry. But those pieces, right, help tell the story, right? Understanding your aid partners. Do you have mutual or automatic aid agreements? Right? Which direction are you going oftentimes? Because those will help us as well as a resilience piece of the puzzle from understanding the fire service. And then know your stations and units. Most folks do. But entering that in is critical, right? Knowing what types of apparatus you have, right? Um, heavy rescue versus light rescue versus, all of the different skills that go with that. And the reason we ask is, right, so then when we look at your baseline capabilities or expectations, right, you look at the region, right? It's not so much about an individual department per se, but when we think hey, this whole metro area has X number of paramedic ambulances or paramedic engines, right? And this number of ambulances, this many trucks over 70 feet. Okay, well those are pieces that can then help emergency management say, all right, these are the puzzle pieces that now we can reach out to help if there is a large scale incident, right? Or if there is something that requires these needs. So knowing your infrastructure is key. Knowing your dispatch folks, right? Reach out to your PSAP. If you don't have a good relationship with your dispatch center, right, that now's the time to reach out and make friends. Um, they have been a great resource, and then they're a growing resource, in connection with us and a lot of the PSAPs. Uh, but they've historically been maybe not as fire focused as we would like. I think it's time for us as a community to build those relationships and take ownership back of that side of the house. But that starts with relationships, right? We got to know the people in those dispatch centers. We've got to know the folks at the CAD vendors, just as they know you guys in the record management, pre-plan, and all of the other services, staffing, and you know the entire fire side, right? The dispatch has kind of been a little law enforcement centric for a while. I think that's a fair statement to say.
Fair, fair statement.
How do we own it? How do we get the fire service back into that space? I think that's the other piece that I would highly recommend chiefs start to build those connections.
I'm curious how the CAD world has responded. Like, we're very tuned to the NERIS and the RM, records management platforms. What is the CAD? Like, I know at that meeting you mentioned initially over at Esri, I think there was one CAD company there. Are you seeing more awareness, more attention coming from them yet?
Yeah, absolutely. We are in the process, and we now have deployed a CAD only kind of integration type so that we can connect directly with CADs for folks that don't have records management systems. So we're working on finalizing kind of the last bits of that. So that was a big push, right? We had started to hear from CADs in probably Q4. I would have loved Q1, but that's how it goes. So it was a little bit of a scramble drill for us at the end of the year. I think we're in a good place. But I think the reason why, and it's because of the fire service, is they put more and more pressure on their vendors, particularly on the CAD side, to say, hey, we want this, we need this, and now folks are reaching out. So now we were playing catch up a little bit. We had all the scaffolding in place. We had envisioned this, but there wasn't a lot of interest early on, so we focused our development in a few other places, and now it's back to that. But yeah, I've been very encouraged. The folks I've gotten to work with, in the last 6 to 8 weeks, we'll say, on the CAD side and the PSAP side in particular, have been really genuine and wanting to get data into NERIS to help their locals, right? The smaller departments that might not have a records management system, but if we can get their times to auto-populate, right? That's the hardest part of most incident data, is entering your timestamps, right? If you can get that from the CAD, the rest of the record's really pretty light, right? From a workload perspective. And so I'm encouraged. but there's still a lot of work to do. There's the CAD space is very diverse. So the more touch points, the more connections we can have, I think the better off we are. But yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, but very encouraging, very positive, and excited to see. We'll be going live with a PSAP here in the next couple of weeks, to see how really that can work to help our firefighters.
Well, the one of my little pet peeves is data beyond the air brake, right? Like, so the tactical data that's now part of the schema, we want to get the humans out of the way as much as we can when we collect that data, right? So, I mean, speak a little bit to that. Some of the new data fields that we're not used to having access to, water on the fire, those types of things that happen tactically, the importance of that CAD integration. That speak to that a little bit because I think that's so important.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably one of my most that's what excites me the most, probably, right? I mean, we've always wanted to know, right, for a structure fire or an outside fire, right? Any kind of fire, when do we get water on the fire, and when was suppression complete? Suppression complete's a little trickier, right? Everyone has their own terminology, but we know water flow pretty well. There's advanced sensors now on apparatus that are communicating back, which is really cool. The it was really exciting. I think it happened in May or June. We got an email in that basically told us, hey, we're adding all these things to our CAD for can remarks for our dispatch, but we only got 8 spots and there's like 10 questions. What do you recommend? And I'm like, well, let's learn about your jurisdiction and really have a lot of outside fire. So like a knocked, I was like, choose your suppression terminology the right way, whether you want knocked down or out, things like that. But people are putting them in there, and they're using the NERIS schema as a way to leverage to get them in. And that data is going to be powerful, right? When we think about water on fire and suppression time, start of search complete, right? What are we after when we arrive to a fire ground, right? It's life and property safety. So what do we need to do, right? Well, we need to suppress the fire and we need to search. Sometimes the order depends, that's an incident command decision. But those are 2 primary things we do on arrival. And then you want to coordinate that with ventilation. And so we don't ask timestamps on ventilation. That's pretty tricky. There's so many different approaches to ventilation, and but we ask it relative to suppression. So if we know suppression time and then we ask ventilation, did you vent before, during, or after suppression? That's a big piece of the puzzle, right? It's an efficient way to understand what we're after, because it's not so much the time of the incident when you ventilate it, it's ventilated relative to your water supply. So if we got that timestamp, then we know, okay, ventilation happened prior to this. Huge, right? When we do analytics, knowing those few seconds really doesn't tell us a whole lot, but knowing categorically your tactical approach to an incident is huge. We've also seen a lot of the kind of incident command software start to add the tactical timestamps in. So that then ties into your RMS. And so there's a reason why our schema was designed the way it was, is that you can add these either as coming out of dispatch or add them from your incident, right? So it depends on what type of connection you have. So if you had a CAD connection coming in and that data had it, cool, it comes in that feed, either to your RMS or to us, and then you kind of fill in the gaps on the incident part of the scenario. So we have it designed to capture on either end. But I think that, the people that don't have it want it, in terms of the timestamps, and then they're like, well, how do we get it? I'm like, well, there's a number of ways, right? And put it in your command sheets, right? If you're still operating, right, a lot of officers will run on kind of a scratch sheet of some kind, right? Leave blanks for those timestamps, and when the radio transmission comes in, mark them down, right?
Mhm.
If you get to the nearest minute, it's still better than not having it. Right? We can still tell a whole lot of information, and then as we start to automate, right, we get better quality there.
It's one of my pet peeves in life right now. I've gotten wound up about it's 2026 and we're running structure fires, complex incidents with crayons and magic markers still. It's like, I feel like we might could get to the glass at this point soon, And I know that's something First Due is very, very focused on. We're excited about is having the records in one place along with the command and incident command function that ties back to training and pre-plans and all these things. There's a lot more capability there that I think the fire service as a whole should be taking advantage of. So that's one of my goals in life for the next my short-term goals is let's try to put the crayons down and start using some glass, but that's another discussion.
Yeah.
So going back and kind of in the same theme, going back to our pump panel analogy, we've connected to the source, we've throttled up, we're seeing the gauge, we're building pressure. I don't think people have given much thought yet to the output. Like, people are thinking of NERIS as an input track, but it's also a, exhaust path there as well, right? So when you guys start cranking out some of this data, what things do you see in the future that we're going to learn? I feel like we don't even know what we don't know yet. So what's the output look like as you look into the future?
There's a lot. There's a lot in our queue that we're designing and building the pipelines for now. And it comes in, we'll say, two parts. So the first is at the local incident level. So when a record gets submitted to NERIS, it hits our API, and it drops into what we call our landing zone. And so we can process incidents extremely fast, millisecond level piece. So if it gets through the API, right, that means the payload is structured to meet our rules. That's not an assessment of quality, right? We could have a bad geocode. Those things could still exist. It's hard to process that instantaneously. But we know that at least it passed all the validation rules. Then what we do is we move it from our landing zone to an accessible zone. And in that process is where we add weather. So depending upon, a lot of RMSs already do have weather. They hit probably the same API we do for capturing all of that data. But we also hit a parcel database. We hit an air quality database where we will be hitting an air quality API. We're hitting and adding your census block to the call so that you can start to layer all the census data. So this all gets enriched upon arrival, and then it gets to the accessible zone. And so then whether you're using a records management system or if you're in a county or a state that sits across where there's multiple vendors now in the place, you can pull all this data out with a consistent enrichment layer, right? Even if some of that data stays local to the department, here's all the stuff we're adding to the record. You can pull it back out from us at the local level via our API or back into your with your vendor. So that's kind of the local enrichment, right? Is providing where we don't have to ask a question of somebody, right? Let's use an existing data set. So that was kind of a mandate right from the start is where can we avoid having someone spend the time? Cool, we've got that piece. And then now once we have all of this, right, it's there's going to be a public data release just like there was in NFIRS, right? Here's kind of a streamlined version of the incident data, right? One of the things we're going to do is, for any medical calls, we strip a lot of that data way back because the intent is never to talk about an individual, right? It's to understand the diversity of medical load that the fire service is still responding to. And so for a core incident record, right, as in a public feed, that gets stripped way back. So there's going to be kind of that similar to what NFIRS did. But then there's going to be a whole series of kind of specialized data products, right? So similar to how NEMSIS talks about, some of their releases where it's aggregate data. We'll have some of that for casualties and rescues so that there's a national feed of how many rescues the fire service makes on a daily basis, right? A number that we've never known. We've always talked about loss, and we still track loss in this system, right? We still want to understand the casualties associated with the hazards we respond to. But the number of folks that we rescue from, car crashes on the highway, that's a rescue, right? We might not treat it the same way as pulling someone out of a structure fire, but if they're trapped in that car, right, when you guys show up, you are saving them, right? You're trapped in an elevator. It's a little dark to think about, but if you guys don't show up to get them out of the elevator, what happens? They're stuck in the elevator indefinitely, right? We don't treat it the same way that we treat it as a structure fire, right? We're not in bunker gear, we're not on air, we're not, we don't get that hero shot, but these are all rescues, right? From that civilian's perspective, you save them. And we need to document that because that justifies, again, it's all of the training, right? You get trained to rescue somebody from an elevator, right? You get trained to rescue somebody from a trench, from swift water. That's all part of being a firefighter these days. So if we can document those, right? And then now here's the national count of lives saved, right? Versus, lives lost. And we still need that category. But when lives saved outpaces live loss and fire, that shows as a profession right? That we are masters of our domain. Can we still get better? Absolutely. Are there still going to be casualties? Absolutely, right? That we're always up against time, right? If we knew before the fire started, right, then the prevention piece comes in, right? How do we prevent the fire, right? That's the other side of the whole equation. So then the community risk dashboards stand up and show the impact of all of this, right? We know that there's emerging hazards with medical oxygen, with batteries and the electrification, right, or the changing of how we store and transfer electricity in the country. Let's stand at the dashboards there so you can see here's the national piece, right? And then at the local level, oh, here's how we relate. Well, this is a huge problem maybe on the East Coast right now, but we know that things kind of progress, right? It could go West Coast to East, North to South, whatever. But you start to see those trends and say, okay, well, we're not impacted right now, but we will be, right? Here's the trend. And so these are the types of things we'll be sharing as part of this larger kind of what we call, NERIS public, right? Is this release of data products that then you can pull in to run against your local analytics, right? To really have dedicated streams where they're purpose built, right? So that we can really focus on a series of issues and tell that story, right, with this public data that just live updates.
So if you're a data analyst working in the fire department, you're about to enter a new universe of capability that we've just never had before. That's
Yeah, APIs will be your friend.
yeah, that's amazing. Do you foresee a time or capability where we could reach a national common operating picture?
I, I'd hope so.
I mean, it
Right. I
seems
think
like
that's
it would
all.
be logical.
Yeah. I mean, I think we there's a lot more short-term fires we got to put out.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, I would love to. I think that's the direction we should strive for, right? Why strive for less than that? Um, it's a hard problem. The diversity of infrastructure of scale, right, is hard. And I think the tricky part with all of that, right, is our uncertainty analysis. So if we had everyone reporting at the same frequency, yeah, that's pretty deterministic. We'd be in very good shape. But we know that the reporting lag, right, even though we've cut down the barriers for the reporting lag, there's still going to be some, right? People have real jobs sometimes, not on top of incident reporting, right? You come back from a call, right? You've got a decon, right? You're now going through all of that infrastructure, right? You're cleaning your apparatus, you're getting ready for the next call, which inevitably comes. The data lag happens, right? Like, and then in the volunteer side, okay, well, I've got to go to work now on top of just being, responding to this call. So the asks of the fire service are so massive relative to entering data that that's part of why we designed this to limit those barriers. But even still, there's going to be that lag. So you've got some time lag with every call, and that varies by region and time of day and all that stuff. So then how do we quantify the uncertainty of the data we do have at the national level? If we get that right, then I think we're moving in the right direction, right? Is okay. We say the number of fires plus or minus 15% or 10%, right? Then we're really onto something where we can drive that home. Right now we're still very deterministic. It's like this is the number of things that have been reported, but it could be as high as this.
Right.
That's a hard problem, and something where we've got some statisticians, and we love more collaboration across the space, but we're not ready yet, but we're working
Right.
towards that's a fun problem to have, right? Is now we're talking like how do we do that? But we got our next 6 months are still pretty full, so we've still got a long ways to go, I think, to get
Few wrenches to
I'm
turn
glad
yet.
to have those kind of conversations, right? Like, yeah, what's next, right? Is much more fun than some of the other conversations we
Well,
sometimes have.
taking my magic marker in the back of a SUV to the next level, when I'm thinking of, use a hurricane, for example, I'm over here in the East Coast as you are, we understand that when it happens. And when our EOC is operating, I'm still talking to the regional EOCs on a phone. I'm there's very little data integration across the region like that. So I'm thinking as, as we get better at this and start to develop more data sharing, maybe we get to a better place as far as, the regional common operating picture of understanding what's going on in a metro area, something like that. That's what I was kind of
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
dreaming
even just
of.
from the work we've put in to build this, fire department jurisdictional layer, right? Um, partnership that started with the National Association of State Foresters. Um, if you know the hurricane cone, right, and here's our prediction of where a hurricane might hit. Well, draw that over top of the jurisdictional boundaries, right? So then now we know all the fire departments that are in the potential impact of this storm. We know their resources, we know who they are, right? The messaging then goes to reach out to be proactive to these departments, right? Hey, we've as forecasters think there might be a storm coming through the next 3 days. This is the potential impact, right? So that those folks are all notified. And then you think, okay, well, if they're all occupied, what is the cascade, right? The fire service is very interconnected. So if they're all responding to the storm, then the impact goes to the folks not impacted. They're backfilling, right? So it's the next tier of like, hey, there's a storm coming. You're not in the path, but your neighboring 5 jurisdictions are. You might see an uptick in aid calls. Be ready. And so it just keeps, eventually you hit kind of the outer wing of the cascade, but we haven't really been proactive in that, right? I know folks are, right? There are great EMs in this country that do tremendous work. How can we give them more tools, right? And this is part of those pieces, is understanding like what is our capacity to respond. And you look at, when we start to get more data, then it's not just here is, they have 3 engines in a truck. It's, these 3 engines in truck are on a average day, right, going to be on a call 60% probability, right, of any given hour they're not available to respond. Cool. That tells us, okay, well, our reserve capacity isn't as high as we think. Those are the pieces that, right, that like, so it's just that foundational piece. Even before we get to this kind of live part, it's leveraging the live data to inform our static data is going to be, I think, really, really powerful.
I mean, the emergency management implications are pretty strong. So that's exciting. Lots of things. That's another episode though, probably. I think we'll get into emergency management later. Right now, let's just try to keep it running and keep the
Yeah.
transition wrapping
Exactly.
up. But
Yes, sir.
Craig, any advice that you want to leave folks with, as we get ready to wrap up, um, anything you want to share with that you think fire chiefs ought to know, firefighters, before we wrap up the day?
Yeah. One, it's just a big thank you to you guys, right? I mean, First Du's been a great partner, and the vendor community at large, right? We couldn't have done this without them. But most importantly, to the fire chiefs that have put their trust in us, whether they wanted to or not. The systems were changing, but thank you. Thank you to all of them. We've worked extremely hard and will continue to work extremely hard to support y'all, to answer your questions. And I think, the big thing is when you're filling out incident reports, right? If this is complex, describe it as complex. Let's tell our story for what it is, because you know the fire service is a very hard job, and I think the more we can accurately describe that, the better off we are as a profession.
Absolutely. And, on the team at First Do, and that we've got a couple thousand, 3,000 clients that are actively reporting now, and life is good. Thank you. I don't know that, I think a strong thank you is in order, because you might not understand it now if you're, maybe been in the fire service a few years. You might not appreciate how profound this is, but me being a really old dude in the fire service, I can tell you that this is historic. So the ability for you guys to do, I heard a lot of the same, chatter when this idea was first put forward. Oh, they can't do it that fast. There was some of those comments and stuff. And I was like, once I saw that FSRI had the ball, I'm like, oh no, we're gonna be all right. This will work. I'm not concerned about it working. It might be challenging, but it's going to work. So please give all our best to the team there, the NERIS team, the FSRI team, the work you're doing with not only NERIS, but the fire dynamics research continues. It's just one of my favorite favorite things in the world, that the work that you guys are doing over there. So please give them my best.
Absolutely.
And that's today's conversation on the First Do Table Talk podcast. Thanks for tuning in. If you found this information to be useful, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with others. They might want to hear it as well. And if you're looking for support related to, operating faster, smarter, with better records, better technology, better command and control, be sure to go to firstdo.com to get more information. Thanks for pulling up a chair on this episode of the First Do Table Talk podcast. We'll see you on the next shift.